like to say that this is not the official statement from the Latvian Ministry of Defense, but this is my opinion and this is my research. And all statements I will make here, it will cover only my opinion. Nevertheless, today I will talk about the host nation support, which in a recent time has turned into a very important issue or theme to discuss about. And so my outline of talk, initially I would like to start with preliminary comments on what is host nation support and where we are, and then I will go more in details about the host nation support and what does it mean. And what host nation means for the Baltic states itself. Then I will touch upon the NATO assurance measures, and during this research we have come up with a new term like extended defense. And then I will conclude this, of course, with a question: is this self-defense or the host nation support, or it's some kind of mixture of both? I would like to start with some kind of historical background of this one. After the Second World War, basically, and then starting the Cold War, there were two fronts, I would say. It was one western part, another Warsaw part countries, or the Soviet Union. Basically, the division among forces was basically the main idea was to keep western part safe, and for this reason NATO developed this defense strategy, which was based upon the conventional warfighting. And as you can see, this map reflects the basically division among the states and the troops which were located near to the Warsaw Pact borders. And I have here some numbers. Basically, in total it was 8 corps, or for non-militaries it means around 320,000 to 640,000. It's up to how we are counting this one. I would say it's basically a lot of people there. More interesting, the next interesting thing is about that in year 1988, basically 89, Germany had to receive 20 or 10 divisions. It's 200 troops. Why I'm talking about this one? Because the situation is very similar to nowadays situation. And host nation support is basically, we can see on map here, it's the starting point of the host nation support. At the beginning it was like only the military responsibility to keep their militaries satisfied with the living conditions and to cover operational needs. Mainly it was United States policy, overseas policy, in order to protect Western countries from the Soviet Union. Now, we are in 2016, and the situation basically is getting, like, I would say the same, but there's differences in numbers, of course, in the border lengths that needs to be protected. And I have given some numbers about I'm talking about the peacetime structure, and during the peacetime altogether, 3 Baltic states has around 18,000 troops on the ground. Nevertheless, according to recent Warsaw summit and the summit in Wales, there were basically politicians took very important decisions for the Baltic state security, and they decided to deploy more forces into the Baltics in order to deter Russia. So, firstly, during the Wales summit, they decided to develop a very high readiness task force, which consists approximately 5 to 10,000, and the NATO response force. Comparing those numbers, of course, there's a significant, I would say, significant like a gap between them, but nevertheless, it's like clear clear point that Russia needs to take into account that the allies will be here and allies will protect the Baltic states. What is post-NATO support? I just briefly, it was very briefly saying that the post-NATO support is usually understood like a reception of allied force into the country. But what does it mean for the country, and how does it reflect on the country's strategies, defense strategy? Basically, the post-nation support, we can talk, it is divided into the three main parts. It's peacetime post-nation support, that's basically what the Baltic states is doing right now. Crisis or wartime and wartime post-nation support, basically it differs each other from with the measures that they come with. It's basically very important to have a civil-military cooperation, military exercises. It's a lot of military exercise going on in the Baltic states, and of course development of the military infrastructure. Wartime is already the reception of significant amount of the troops. It's like when the Western Germany had to receive 10 divisions in 10 days. We are like struggling to receive I don't know, probably those battle groups. Then the questions arise, is the post-nation support a capability or it is a strategy? From the Baltic states perspective, I would say this is the capability and this is the strategy. Because you see, very interesting documents for the research is Baltic states defense strategy concepts, military concepts, etc. And during researching and going through those concepts, we can see how the strategy of the Baltic states develops. And this is how I see the development of the post-nation support within the defense strategies. I have chosen two main points here. It's 2004, when the Baltic states joined NATO Collective Security Organization, and 2014. It's a crisis in Ukraine. But nevertheless, I will start with the building up period. It's until joining NATO. So the Baltic states, they had this very harsh experience being under the Soviet rule, and they definitely decided to go west and to integrate themselves into the NATO and into the European Union. NATO required to modernize their Baltic states armies, command and control, they required to develop a host nation support system. At the beginning in 2000s, there were nobody who knew about host nation support in Baltic states. And this was completely new topic for the Baltic states. And NATO came and said, if you want to be a part of the NATO, you should develop this capability. It's because the reason was very simple. In 2002, the NATO developed NATO Response Force, which means the force who could be deployed in everywhere in NATO territory, which means again the restore of the NATO and the deterrence factor for the future adversary or future aggressor. And in order to receive the NRF forces or the NATO response force, we need to have this host nation support capability. So, starting with the year 2000, into the Baltic states, I would say Estonian, Latvian, and Lithuanian defense strategies or defense concept appeared this host nation support. After joining NATO, this host nation support system basically was, I would say, in like diapers, because the Baltic states had only 4 years in order to develop the host nation support system. Nevertheless, during the 10 years from 2004 until 2014, and in close cooperation among all Baltic states, they managed to develop I would say, very good host nation support system in order to receive allied forces. But we can observe during this research of the military concepts and strategies, we see that the first priority always was the self-defense of the Baltic states. And you can see there's a written that Baltic states had to develop combat readiness, command control, civil military cooperation, etc., etc. And then, until this building up period, the host nation support was maybe in the third or the fourth place in each of the country. And later on, it's like it was like going up in a priority list. Nevertheless, keeping the self-defense capabilities as a first priority. And now, currently, I would say this is the same situation, or in the defense strategies we can observe that the self-defense is priority number 1, and the host nation support is priority number 2, which is basically very, very closely dependent from each other. So, and after the crisis in Ukraine, in Wales summit, they decide a lot of basically the questions they touch upon was mainly about the reception of the Allied forces into the Baltics, and this was I would say this was a main or the very important push to the Baltic states to develop more deeper this capability and develop this strategy, because I think that we can divide these countries like Baltic states or any other country in a 4 models of defense strategies. There are one part of the countries which are the which has well-developed military forces, and they were capable. And those usually are the sending nations or sending the troops in order to support weaker members of the alliance. Then we have some kind of transition model where we can see that at the beginning the nation or the state was like very heavily dependent on the host nation, basically receiving allied forces, but they're now changing and putting a lot of resources into the development of armed forces, and they start to become sending nation. And in my opinion, this is the Poland. Third model is about the Baltic states. Baltic states is basically taking into consideration the military budgets, the army, and the capabilities is heavily dependent on the host nation support, or basically heavily dependent on the reception of allied forces in order to deter Russia or some other adversary. And there's a fourth model of the strategy, which is basically the states like Sweden or Finland, which are not a part of the NATO, but they're still afraid, for instance, from Russia, and they're looking for additional opportunities how to deter Russia. And in 2014 they signed with NATO those host nation support agreements, which means that in the case of crisis or war, the NATO probably will use their territories to deploy the forces. So, in this case, the Baltic states basically, as I said, is heavily dependent on this host nation support. Extended defense NATO assurance measures, as I said, there was in 2014 Wales summit. They developed the NFIUs, NATO Force Integration Units, which currently are present in the Baltic states and other states in NATO. So, and they developed a very high readiness joint task force with the main purpose to deter Russia. And yes, and the second point is the 2016 Warsaw Summit. Warsaw Summit basically was a very important summit for the Baltic states, where it was decided to deploy 4 battle groups, basically in Poland, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. But this is again the challenge for the Baltic states in order to receive those battle groups. The one battle group consists of 1,000 personnel or soldier. So in this case, the Baltic states has to think about the appropriate infrastructure, appropriate support, welfare support or family support, etc., etc. You can see this on this slide that since 2004 we are already hosting the Baltic Air Policing Mission here in Baltics, and a NATO response force. Of course, NATO response force never been deployed in Baltic states. So, but this was the reason why we developed this host nation support system. And yes, and then the deterrence, basically the deterrence phase, starting from 2014 until now, when we need to think about the reception of VJTF, enhanced forward presence battle groups, plus NRF, air policing, etc., 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 plus American troops which arrived in 2014 within Operation Atlantic Resolve. So basically this all means very huge burden on the national budget in order to develop appropriate conditions for those troops. Okay, so to conclude this one, I would like to say that the self-defense capabilities is a priority number one, and it should remain as priority number one. But the self-defense capabilities in this case means that the states, Baltic states, has to give something to the NATO in order to receive this deterrence force. Firstly, to participate in international operations, what we are doing, Afghanistan, it was in Iraq, Mali, etc. And secondly, the combat force in order to gain time against the adversary or aggressor in order to receive those allied forces. Secondly, the host nation support. It's again when, for instance, I said again, it gained enough time allowing to receive NATO reinforcement to the national armed forces, but this mainly, I would like to say again, this is mainly during peacetime or the crisis. For instance, the hybrid warfare, which is very popular after the crisis in Ukraine, it's already touched upon this host nation support issues. Extended defense. How we see extended defense? Because you see Baltic states with their defense budgets, they don't have enough money to develop their capabilities in different fields. It's like we cannot afford the fighter jets. Therefore, we have a NATO air policing mission in Baltics. We do not have other capabilities or combat capabilities which could be sufficient to stop the enemy, and therefore the VJTF enhanced power presence is about filling up our national gaps, and this means that we are like extending our defense with the allied forces. And of course there should be some particular circumstance when you can use this extended defense. You need to have allied who you rely on and who could strengthen you in a case of crisis, or you are in alliance like NATO or other alliance. So basically this term can be used to describe this situation. So Baltic defense strategy. Our main conclusion basically it's a largely mix of the self-defense capabilities and the host nation support capabilities, which means going through all those military concepts and strategies. Everywhere is saying that we are the part of collective defense. In order to fulfill this collective defense, we need to develop our self-defense, and we need to be able to receive those forces. And after the crisis in Ukraine, the host nation support became very important because the threat near our border became more bigger than it was 10 years ago. So, and I think for the future, Baltic states, host nation support will take a more significant part in the Baltic states' defense strategy, and I don't think that Baltic states could become like I explained the second model of the becoming a sending nation, because separately we are too small to send the force to the other countries, but I think yes, and this is the reason why this is a very important strategy that should be fulfilled and should be carried on in the future. So this is enough from my side. Questions after?
Yeah, after the session.
Yeah.